All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today's episode number 39, we are going to be talking about procrastination, understanding procrastination, how to beat your genes regarding this problem. So we're joined by Dr. Doug Lisle. Dr. Lisle, how are you doing today?
Good to hear your voice again.
Excellent, thank you. And let's take it from the top, Dr. Lisle. Tell us a little bit, or maybe a lot, about what is procrastination and what's this all about, and how can we get around it?
Yes. Well, procrastination is often seen as a sort of a character weakness or a bad habit or something like of this nature, when actually all human behavior can simply be understood in terms of cost-benefit analysis. In other words, and it's not just human behavior, the behavior of all organisms is emanating from nothing other than a cost-benefit process. The genes have built neural circuits to do exactly that task, and that's what's happening with respect to every decision that every human makes, and that includes putting something off that they could be doing now, or procrastination. So we call it procrastination, and we give it a little bit of a pejorative slant because we suspect that it has costs associated with it, and sometimes those costs will outweigh the benefits. And so it seems like there are times when the person is effectively making a mistake, and often they are. And the reason why that's going to be true is that sometimes the correct solution to a problem of prioritizing what it is that you're going to do is complex. And there's a lot of variables that are being considered, and therefore sometimes a given set of variables will outweigh another set of variables, and the person will wind up putting things off. And it turns out that maybe in evidence that comes up later or in a different kind of analysis a little bit later on, they figure that they should have hustled and they should have gotten off their rear end and gotten something done. So it's going to turn out that I will say that there's effectively three different types of procrastination, or three different sort of issues that will give rise to procrastination. The first is going to be what I'm going to call just straight rational analysis. So the second is going to be actually an ego defensive maneuver that is potentially quite self-destructive. And the third is going to be what I'm going to call system overload, where the person is literally frozen up and they don't know which move to make first because they've got too complex an array of things to consider, and they're not sure what is the most optimal way to begin. So but the first one is where we're going to start, Nate, and that's going to be with the situation where it actually is quite rational that the person puts things off because they may not have to do whatever it is. So this is a derivative likely of many things that happen in human natural history, but one of them in particular would have been debts. So there could have been many situations, and obviously were, where suppose you and I made a trade, and you were going to give me 20 coconuts, and then I was going to give you some bananas next month in exchange when the bananas became ripe. And if I got the coconuts from you now, then when the bananas came in, I would likely drag my feet about paying you those bananas. And the reason could be that with every day that passes where I don't give you those bananas, there's a chance that something will happen to you. You may die. You may forget that I owe you the bananas. You may chase some hot grass skirt in those days, on the other side of the river, and head down the river chasing some gal, and you may not be back in the village for a long time, etc. And so as a result, it may be the case that if I procrastinate, that I may not ever have to give you the bananas. And so this is it's very intelligent behavior to procrastinate on debt repayment, and that's going to include a lot of things that look like that. So, for example, in school, a lot of times I found out by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I found out that if other kids weren't getting some project done that was a project that was supposed to be done by a given date, that it was a very high likelihood that the teacher would extend the deadline. And that's because the teachers are wimps, and they will not enforce things and flunk 80% of the class because 80% of the class is too irresponsible to get the thing done on time. And so I quickly found out that if I could just keep my pulse on the wind of what the average colleague was doing, then I didn't have to do any better than what the average colleague was doing, because they probably, as long as I was somewhere near the middle of the pack in terms of responsibility, there wasn't going to be any significant consequences to me. And that's been proven to me, many times over the last 40 years, that being a little flaky is perfectly responsible. You just have to keep your eye on what the average dum-dum is up to, and make sure you don't do it any worse than he's doing it, and then you're going to be fine. And so that means that you don't have to hustle and get everything done, get it all done right, because it's just simply not necessary. And so this is a derivative of the concept of the Stone Age, that it's rational to procrastinate on debt repayment, and that is the rational reason for procrastination, and that is because it's ultimately profitable. You save the energy that you would otherwise have to expend, and so that's how that works. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're reminding me, Trevor Baker in elementary school still owes me lunch money, and he delayed it all the way until 6th grade ended, and then he switched schools. And I have not forgotten, and you just reminded me again.
There you go. You got it. So I used to work in a maximum security prison, and at the maximum security prison, the state government.
That's how we met, by the way. Right.
Oh.
Your lectures got me out. They got me free.
That's right. I very cleverly got you out of there.
I was rehabilitated.
Yes. It turns out that the geniuses in downtown Sacramento would come up with various and sundry edicts about what psychologists or psychiatrists had to do, and what paperwork they had to fill out, and what forms they had to file for this, that, or the other. And whenever these edicts would come down, there'd be 50 psychologists groaning about this awful new set of work that they were going to have to do. And I would tell them that we were not going to have to do it, because I knew our brethren around the state were just as flaky and lazy as we were. And so as a result, they weren't going to do it either. And so the whole thing was going to collapse under noncompliance. And so this is in fact what happened over and over again across my 10-year career there, that the ingenious ideas of the idiots downtown with their new ridiculous, very often time-wasting and onerous procedures would all go up in flames within 3 or 4 months, and then nobody was doing it, and then they just dropped it. So a great example of this was they had a new law about that we had to comply with the local counties in terms of interviewing inmates in flu season, that we had to get a flu shot. And there was no way in hell I was going to get a flu shot. And so this is just a government scheme to make a bunch of money on behalf of some pharmaceutical companies is my inference about this whole thing. There's good scientific evidence to support that. So anyway, I wasn't going to get a shot of their stuff in my arm. And of course, then there's paperwork that goes around saying, are you going to do this or aren't you going to do this? And so I checked the box that says I wasn't going to do it, at which point they then warn you that you must then wear a mask over your face to talk to all your patients, and you have to be 6 feet away from them, i.e., otherwise you would be mistreating these prisoners by exposing them to the possible flu virus that you must be carrying and don't know, which is, of course, ridiculous. So in any event, none of us would do this. So the first year, I didn't hear anything about it. I just refused to get the inoculation. The second year, my supervisor, who I would rarely see, working in another building, because the professional level people are pretty much not under a lot of supervision. And she one day when I was not there dropped off a mask for me to wear, just dropped it on my desk. That's the only feedback I ever got from
It's a pretty small paperweight.
That was the only thing that took place. I never wore the mask. Nobody ever asked me about it. I never had to sign a thing that said I was going to wear the mask, and that was the end of it. So that's a classic example of a government edict and something that I was supposed to have to do and never did. And so that is the rational reason for procrastination.
Yeah, I wish I had known more of this in college and such, because I wasted a lot of time trying to do things completely right when I realized I really didn't have to.
Right. Yeah, you eventually caught on. So that is of course a very reasonable a view of procrastination in general. So you're simply running a cost-benefit analysis, and you are trying to avoid the energy output. This is why people will wait till the last minute to get something done, because they're waiting to the last minute because they might not have to do it. So if your unwanted mother-in-law, may or may not visit you on Thanksgiving, and the house is a mess, a good idea is to just fiddle around and wait. And then when you actually find out that she's coming, then throw it together at the last minute as best you can and call it good. This is like standard operating procedure for human beings. This is you will see this very consciously and calculatedly done in the law. And so it's going to turn out that when it comes to, for example, civil law trials, there will be a lot of bluffing on both sides about how, oh boy, we think we got a big case and we're going to go to trial. And everybody's bluffing and blowing smoke and huffing and puffing about how they want to go to trial and clean the other's clock. But meanwhile, neither attorney actually wants to go to the trouble of preparing for trial, because it's a tremendous amount of effort. And so what there is a lot of gambling that's involved here, and procrastination gambling, where they will settle the cases on the courthouse steps. Both attorneys have every intention of settling it on the courthouse steps, because neither one of them prepared very well for trial, and neither one of them wants to go to trial. So if you are the flakier human, that you only did a 30% prep and the other guy did a 40% prep, you're actually in more trouble than he's in, but he doesn't know that you're in more trouble than he's in. He feels like he's in trouble because he could be in trouble because you could be 50% prepared and he's only 40% prepared. So both of these procrastinating flakes are absolutely highly motivated to settle this case, which is a major reason. It's not the only reason. Another reason is just mitigating risk of what you could lose a trial. But a huge reason for that process to go down the way it is that everybody's procrastinating, and that's how lawyers have to figure their time and how they can make a living. The law is very entrepreneurial in this way. They have to look at cases and try to figure out what case is a good gamble, time and money wise. It has nothing to do with justice. That's not generally involved. What's involved is very, very sophisticated cost-benefit analysis, trying to analyze how many dollars per hour I'm going to get on the effort that I'm going to put in. And one of the key contributing factors to optimizing your rate of return is to procrastinate. And so this is that's just an example of how this is in no way a foible. This is conscious, intelligent behavior on the part of an organism that can compute multiple different possibilities for outcomes and can assign reasonable probabilities to those multiple outcomes, and then try to figure out how to place their checkers on the checkerboard in the optimal way in order to get the best payoff. And so that is the chief number one reason for procrastination behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
and so,
hold on. And I would argue that for people that can sense, they can smell a rat in terms of this strategy, that feels like it's not always the best solution, I can tell you that there's a conscious method to actually figuring out whether or not the procrastination that you're doing is actually accurately appropriate, or whether or not it's actually a mistake. And it's accurately appropriate if it turns out there's a significant chance that you may never have to do whatever it is that you don't want to do. Like in the case of the attorney, it would be a complete preparation for trial. There's an excellent chance that you're not going to have to do that, so therefore it makes a tremendous amount of sense to be procrastinating. Now, people will use the same procrastination strategy on many things where it feels like they're not going to have to do it, but the truth is that they're going to have to do it. So one of those things, for example, is paying their bills. So they'll fiddle around and not pay their bills, but part of that has to do, I believe, with a Stone Age algorithm that is saying, hey, those are your debts and you might not have to pay them because, after all, the electrical and power companies could go out of business. Some terrorists could bomb the whole banking system and nobody may even know what's going on. So I might just get away with this. In other words, there's a lingering possibility that for something may come up and you may not have to do this. And the truth of the matter is that odds of that something are effectively zero in many cases. So when you identify a situation where there is something that you don't want to do, but you are going to have to do it without any doubt, then it is a very good strategy to do it first and do it immediately. Okay? And the reason why you would want to do things in that way, and why very highly conscientious people get advantages in life because they do this, they behave in that way, is the following. And that is that if you can essentially get things out of the way that will be taking time later, and you can essentially keep your calendar as clear as possible, then if opportunities come up later where your time is limited, but suddenly there's an opportunity to spend your time doing something that would be enjoyable or otherwise profitable, then you don't have to instead pass on it because there's something that you have to do that you have put off. Okay? So this is why it is smart to be very organized and aggressive about getting things done that you are absolutely going to have to do, while you may be very flaky and procrastinating and foot dragging about doing things that you don't have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's sort of an algorithm for figuring out where it makes sense to procrastinate and where it does not make sense.
Mm-hmm. And what about procrastinating setting up those systems? That's what I have a lot of trouble with. I'll set up those systems. I'll put the envelopes for the budgets, next month. Right.
This is actually an advantage in the modern world, is that the modern world actually has extraordinary regularities that are very, essentially likely to recur over and over again. So it makes it possible to be very profitable by investing in organizational systems that are going to take care of those things. And that is where a normal human mind not taking advantage of that could be missing a bet. So life has a great deal to do with maintenance activities, and so the more we sort of organize maintenance level activities, the more time you have for otherwise creative, profitable sort of things.
So things like dedicating some time to clean the house, wash the dishes, do the laundry, blah blah blah, all the stuff that everybody hates to do, or at least I guess hired it out.
Anything, yes. Here's an example of why it makes sense to attack things that you're going to have to do. Let's suppose there's some project that you've been assigned to that is going to have to be done by the end of next month. And let's suppose that you know that it's going to take 4 days to do this project. Now, your Stone Age brain walks around this thing and calculates, and sometimes incorrectly, the possibility that you're not going to have to do it. So it sort of calculates things almost on with an estimating program that looks like how regular things would be in the Stone Age. But things in the modern environment can be an awful lot more rigid and predictable than in the Stone Age. So let's suppose that you've got this project you've been assigned at work, and you're going to have to do this thing, and it's going to take you, or maybe it's a school assignment. So you've got a paper that is a term paper, and you go to UC Berkeley, and this paper is going to be due on December 10th because that's the last end of teaching for the quarter or semester, and that's just how it's going to go. And it's 33% of the grade. They've talked about it several times. Like, there's no way this is not going to happen, and there's no way you're going to get out of this thing, not unless you drop the class. So now we're in the class, and we're going to take the class, and we need it for our major, and we've taken the midterm, and then there's a final, and we've got this paper. And this paper is going to be a 4-day project. Now, let's look at the standard Stone Age behavior of the average individual. The average brain says, gee, there's a possibility I'm not going to have to do this paper. That's what's going to come up. So they fiddle, and they fiddle, and they fiddle, and they fiddle, and they fiddle. And then it's December 5th, and there's about 4 or 5 days left, and suddenly they get off their rear end, and now they have to really hustle, and they have to pull an all-nighter, and now they're in trouble, short of sleep for finals. And this is just absolutely standard operating procedure for humanity. Now, let's talk about why that's a bad idea. In principle. So the utility of doing this paper on November 1st to November 4th is the following. There is, and here I will outline some ways of looking at this problem mathematically, so that you can sort of test your own thinking against it, so that you can use this as a way of thinking about procrastination problems. An intelligent thing to do would be to look at this and say on September 10th, when you get the assignment, is that it's due on December 10th. There is some possibility that this guy could throw it out. Okay? There is a possibility that he could throw out this assignment. Now, when is that likely to happen? Well, it's not going to happen early in the semester. It could happen late in the semester. It could be that there's such a hue and cry over the midterm and how much readings and everything that there's a student revolt, and the guy just says forget it. Or he could lose his TA funding, and et cetera, and so that he doesn't have anybody to read the papers, so he says forget it. We're not going to do the papers after all. So there is some possibility that you might not have to do it. But this is why we do not want to write the paper on September 10th to September 14th. Because there's a window of opportunity where this thing that we're going to have to do may not have to be done. So what we should be doing is thinking in terms of probabilities consciously about this. And so that's why it makes sense to not lift a finger till November 1st. Now, why would we wait? So we go through half of the time, for example, and we don't lift a finger until there's the final 6 weeks. Now, why would we do this? The reason we do this is that we're actually trying to optimize the following parameters. We're trying to use the following parameters as we think this thing through, and that is that we want to give a big chance, a nice big fat chance that we don't have to do it at all. Now, as November 1st comes, and now we're in the last 50% of the time available for this thing to go up in smoke. Now, if we wait till the very end, so let's suppose we wait till November 28th. Now there's an exceedingly low chance that he's going to cancel this assignment. And we have a problem that we only have 6 days left. And so we must now spend 4 of those days on this assignment, which means if there's some other very important opportunity or important need that we have, we won't have the resources to do it. So let's suppose Barry Manilow comes to town, and he's your favorite artist in the whole world, and your friend got you tickets, okay? Now you can't go see Barry because you don't have the time to do it. So essentially, this now became very, very costly that you have crammed yourself into a corner, and you have no choice but to do this behavior, and you waited until it was almost certain. In other words, that it was a virtual certainty that you had to do it. this is not the ideal situation. Now, this is exactly the situation that human beings naturally go through because they aren't running these estimations very well. They're running them on Stone Age flaky algorithms when behavior was a lot less regimented. Okay? So this is why they wind up in this situation, and it's a problem. But if instead you do this rationally and you say, okay, listen, I'm going to give this a very good shot of going up in smoke. So maybe I'm going to wait till November the 10th, and I'm going to give there every possibility. And I'm even going to ask and request that this thing be dropped, that we've got too much to do, et cetera. And we watch the professor backlash as he says, no, this assignment has to take place. It wouldn't be fair. I've already had six of the 200 of you have already turned in the things, so there's no way it wouldn't be unfair. You all have the same problems. Too bad. You got to do it. Okay? Fine. So now we have 30 days left, and we've got 4 days that need to be spent on this problem. And there's a very high probability that we're going to have to do this. So the wise move then is to do it now, because what we want to do is have maximum flexibility for all possible opportunities in the following 26 days. So once we have figured out that it is very likely that we're going to need to do this, then the thing to do is to attack it as quickly as possible and get it out of the way, because that makes your life, in principle, more open to optimizing possibilities rather than closing yourself down and possibly missing terrific opportunities or important things that need to be done, and then you've backed yourself into a corner.
Mm-hmm. So I got a question for you.
Sure.
Barry Manilow, really, Dr. Lisle?
I couldn't resist. I don't know. It just popped into my head. All right.
Yeah. So serious question though. What you're saying is, if you're procrastinating, just kind of reason out that there really is no way around it, and you're gonna have to do it, and then just do it. Kind of like what Nike says.
Right. Right. And but you can essentially help your ability to rationally make this computation by sort of understanding what the real issues are. So you are when you are procrastinating normally, you're just following Stone Age algorithms that you're sort of these are very unconscious cost-benefit analyses, and you don't know why you're doing it. It just seems like it's sort of a naughty bad habit, or you're lazy or a flake or whatever. Okay, but that's actually generally not what's happening. What's going on is that there's actually algorithms, cost-benefit algorithms that are being run, and it's useful to know that those cost-benefit algorithms can actually be mistaken. They can be distorted because there's preset estimates in those algorithms that are put in by essentially your history of Stone Age life. And so it's the very same kind of distorted algorithms where people, young people, young men in particular, will take extraordinary chances a lot of times with their life and safety in order to show off for females, because they're sort of computing their longevity and their mating career over a relatively short window, because they're anticipating that they're going to be dead by 40. Now they don't know that they're doing this, but that's sort of how the algorithms are being run. And as a result, they, for example, don't back down from fights that they should back down from, because those fights, a big moment in the bar or the local high school or wherever it is, essentially, according to the Stone Age algorithm, is going to be viewed and then is going to be essentially parroted around the village, and it's going to have a profound impact on that individual's potential mating career if he was living in the Stone Age. Okay?
Right.
But he is not living in the Stone Age, and so his modern mind doesn't do a great job of computing this, and he takes chances, and then he winds up with an injury that might maim him for life, okay, behind this sort of thing. And yet it was worth it for males in the Stone Age to take those kinds of risks because the reproductive stakes were so high. So this is an example of where the modern mind and the Stone Age mind can be at variance, and it's very useful to know, what those algorithms are running and when they are very likely to be mistaken, in order so that we can optimize our behavior so that you can optimize your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dr. Lisle, we have a caller here
Sure.
that wants to speak with you, so we're going to put you on right now. Caller,
Sure.
what's your name?
My name's Luke.
Luke. Hi, Luke. How you doing?
Wonderful.
Good.
All right. You're on with Dr. Lisle and Nate.
Hey, guys. First of all, I just want to say I love your show so much. I'm addicted to it. I listen to every episode whenever they come out. It's very fascinating. And my question is why does the world seem to be so fascinated with white men and women when it comes to pornography and covers of magazines and in movies? You mentioned earlier in one of your podcasts that what we find attractive is sort of universal. Is there something in that ethnic group that is better with their genes and all that?
I read your question. Nate had put that question on last week on my email, and we looked at that, and we didn't get to it last week. That's a very interesting question, and first of all, I have to say that I'm not sure you're correct. Okay, so we're going to begin there. You have to believe. Let's suppose, for example, we would start with the null hypothesis, which is that would not be true. That there would be there's a strong bias in human beings to mate with members of their own race. There's going to be a great deal of reasons why that would be true. Now, the bias is pretty strong. It's not ironclad, but it's pretty significantly evident. And so, therefore, we would expect that, for example, African Americans or African people would be interested in African pornography, and that Asian people would be interested in Asian pornography, etc. Now, the thing is that in the United States, Caucasian people are not only the dominant population-wise, dominant not in any other way other than sheer numbers I'm talking about. And also you should understand that visual pornography is overwhelmingly a male consumption thing. So we're really talking about white males buying pornography, basically photography of females. So so now the thing to ask would be, of the money that is spent on pornography, how much of the money is spent by white males versus black males versus Asian males versus Hispanic males? So it would be very interesting to know how much money is being spent, and then by those various ethnic groups. And then if we were to then determine how, of the money that's spent, how much of that photography is of, for example, of women of each of those groups, we would then have to see evidence that the white women were photographed more often per dollar spent than in the others. So it's an interesting concept. I mean, your eyeball estimate is that the Caucasians are overrepresented in this relative to the financial interests and relative to essentially population base rates. I am not sure that that's true. I can remember, for example, visiting the Orient a few times and, of course, walking by a counter that had pornographic materials through no fault of my own. I'm sure I was there just to buy some raw almonds and some Evian water. But when I did see a whole bunch of magazines, I saw 100 different magazines, all with very youthful-looking Asian girls on the front of them in various amounts of little attire. And so it was not the case that where this was Asia or Thailand or wherever I was, or Japan, that this was a bunch of Caucasian women. So so we don't know. So you got an interesting hypothesis, and I don't know what the answer is. And if it were true that Caucasians were literally overrepresented in terms of a universal human attractiveness to this, then the only thing that I could suspect would be the case, I have a couple of different concepts that would be possible. But one of the things that could be possible would be simply the socioeconomic status of America and Western Europe could be lording over the world, that these are sort of the economic winners of the world, and therefore this is sort of more attractive. Maybe. That's a possibility. It's also a possibility that there's a deeper possibility that is interesting. And it's going to be the case that there are the shapes of secondary sexual characteristics in different races is quite significant. And that is that Africans have greater degrees of secondary sexual characteristics than Caucasians, and Caucasians have more than Asians. So the big muscles that make men attractive are more prominent in Africans. The hips and busts are more prominent in African women. That it's more prominent. Those characteristics are more prominent in Caucasian men and women than they are in Asian men and women. So these are sort of natural variances that have occurred, and whether or not that has an impact on pornographic tastes of men around the world that are buying pornography, I don't know. So, good, interesting question. Very, useful keeping your ear to the ground, trying to sniff out anomalies or interesting questions in modern society vis-a-vis evolution. But the answer to your question is I don't know, not sure, and and there's actually additional ideas that have been considered, but not with enough merit for me to talk about them.
Thank you so much for answering my question, and I hope you guys keep doing what you're doing for a long time.
Okay, very good. Thanks for calling.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Luke. We appreciate it. All right. Okay. So you were talking about procrastination and how the big issue for procrastination is just doing it, especially for tasks where you're gonna have to do it. Things like paying your electric bill, or doing a paper for a term, or filing for divorce. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, mowing the yard.
There we go. That's a lot better, which would lead to the other. So.
Go ahead.
So what are the other possibilities now? So what are the things that are stopping somebody from doing that for things that they are not necessary?
Let's see. I mean, the things that are stopping them is this. I mean, what I'm getting at is that the way the algorithms are built, the motivational mechanisms inside people, they're built to run these cost-benefit analysis, and they will come up with some wrong answers if they're not seeing the question clearly. And so you can improve your life by being smarter about these issues, and that can actually be a little turning point in somebody's life where they realize that they've been essentially procrastinating for a what do you call it, seductive but incorrect reasoning, and they can get their act together and sort of turn their life around and make better use of the time they have on Earth by not fiddling. There's another benefit, incidentally, to attacking problems that you're going to have to do, and that is when you're not doing something and it's looming that you're very likely that you're going to have to do it, it's actually taking up workspace in the brain. It's your brain keeps revisiting it, and it keeps thinking about how it's going to have to do it, and it keeps having to rerun the analysis that it may have to do it, and it keeps trying to rerun the analysis about when it is that they're going to finally have to get off your rear end and do it, or else it's going to be very costly. So it's actually pretty significant prices to procrastinate. So there better be good reasons to procrastinate. So that's why it's useful to run the conscious analysis about the statistical likelihood that you are going to have to do this. And if the statistical likelihood is high and the actual the time and effort involved is moderate, then one should attack these things fairly aggressively. And if you do that, you'll have a better life.
Hmm. Yeah, and when I think of what you're saying, part of me thinks that it seems like it's you tell somebody who's say in an addictive pattern, say they're addicted to alcohol or something. You say, well, you've got to realize that it's bad for you, and then just do it. Just stop. Just do it.
Sure.
So there seems like there's a little bit more to this.
Well, yeah. I mean, the truth of the matter is that they're actually very similar problems. The reason why you have addiction, and the only reason you have addiction, is because you have an unnatural payoff matrix in the cost-benefit analysis, because the addictive substance or process, for example, gambling, pornography, etc., the addictive stimulus is a supernormal stimulus acting on the mind, and particularly the pleasure centers of the brain, which essentially are sending a false signal of biological success, which makes it essentially motivated to repeat those acts because the system is essentially sensing biological victory. Okay? That's what happens. That's what I have termed the pleasure trap in the book that I wrote with Alan Goldhammer about that process. Explains that this is a way of distorting the cost-benefit analytic engine that is the human mind, and biasing behavior in a way that is difficult to get out of. So we can recognize it and understand it, but actually getting a person out of the trap is truly art and very slippery and not easy to do, as you'd expect. You would expect that it would be very difficult because the system is simply following the cost-benefit analytics that it was genetically programmed to follow. And if it follows that in an environment when it's been exposed to distortions, stimuli distortions, then it's in trouble, which is why it is, incidentally, that the number one behavioral goal of people in the United States of America is to lose weight every year, and yet they're not doing it. Okay? They have tremendous stakes involved in losing weight. You have marriages in deep trouble. You have lonely people that are unable to secure mates. It isn't that they would be unable to secure mates. They are unable to secure mates for whom their nervous systems would consider them to be a reasonable genetic trait. And the reason is because they're overweight, relatively unattractive relative to their genetic potential. They know that this is true, and their nervous system, our girl who is a genetic 8, who is masquerading as a 5 because of her extra 30 pounds, knows quite well that this is, in fact, the obstacle between herself and maybe getting married and having kids and having a happy life. Okay? Can't do it. Why? Because she's got the weight on. Why does she have the weight on? Because she's eating a distorted diet. Even most people who do not understand the process of weight loss needs to be moved towards food that is closer to human nature's natural history. That is the solution. The solution is not portion control, a ketogenic, high-protein diet, a ferocious workout regimen, or anything else under the sun. So even once people get advice from people like myself, John McDougall, Alan Goldhammer, Caldwell Esselstyn, T. Colin Campbell, Neil Barnard, Rip Esselstyn, etc. Even once people have actually found the correct direction, it is exceedingly difficult for them to go that direction. And the reason is that the cost-benefit analytic engine was designed by genes that have been around for hundreds of millions of years, and they're not going to change very easily. So when we talk about the problems of procrastination, we are talking about an absolutely analogous problem, and that is that the Stone Age algorithms, the cost-benefit algorithms, are also estimating the probabilities of us having to do things, and they're estimating them on a Stone Age basis. And the Stone Age, there was a lot of flaky crap, okay? Yeah, I'll pay you after the next, full moon, maybe, if the bananas come in. These are the flaky contracts and highly fluid agreements that had to be made in cases where you have an environment that has a lot of variance to it, and a much more variance than the regulated sort of trades and institutions and processes that we have in the modern environment. So this is why people are, again, walking around with the Stone Age algorithm, using procrastination as a highly rational tool, but not actually consciously digging into those probabilities and estimating those parameters very well, because they weren't designed to do that. They're just following their impressionistic sense of how these probabilities are likely to pan out, and they're half flaky. So people do a lot of half flaky behavior. They do sort of an okay job. This is actually one of the reasons why your unusually conscientious people, the people in the upper quarter of the distribution of the conscientiousness curve, these people actually thrive a lot in the modern environment, sometimes independent of their intelligence. In other words, it's the fact that they are on top of things, have excellent credit reports, get things done on time, etc. They get raises, they get promotions. They are essentially more responsible. And in the modern world, we keep track of those things a little bit more carefully, and so there's significant benefits associated with that behavior, in addition to the fact that they are living in such a way with an inner peacefulness that's possible, or more flexibility in their behavior because they have kept their calendar more clear because they're a little bit ahead of the game. Okay, so you are correct in saying that once you identify this and even understand the underlying mechanisms, this doesn't necessarily solve the problem. That is true. In the same way that identifying the pleasure trap does not solve the problem, but the more insight that you have into it, the closer that you get a look at it, as people turn their intelligence and get greater insight into the way their own neural circuits work, they can start to essentially learn their way out of these traps. And I'm not going to say everybody's going to do it, or that anybody that's going to do it a little bit will end up doing it a lot. But the point is, the possibility is there, and that's why we call this podcast Beat Your Genes, because that is exactly what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how do we do it?
Oh, Jesus. Believe it or not, it's worth sometimes writing up a taxonomy of all the things that you do very routinely in this life. And when you look at that taxonomy, sometimes it's a good thing to imagine yourself, if you're an efficiency expert, if you were to look at that taxonomy and then figure out, if it was your job to figure out how to make these processes get done as efficiently, as effectively as possible, how would we go about doing it? If somebody was going to pay us a lot of money as a consultant to how to do this, how would we do it? And the truth is with 3 minutes thought in your head, a lot of times you will come up with a whole host of things that you know would be worth doing, and then if you execute those things, you wind up with a better life. And so this is I have a way that I sometimes attack problems clinically that doesn't involve this, but it involves the same kind of use of imagination. And that is that sometimes if I have somebody facing quite a difficult problem, let's suppose that they really wanted to get into nursing school, or they really want to get a relationship. There's things that are very important to them, and they're struggling with this, and they're having problems with it. And they'll come to me, and we're discussing things, and they're depressed or frustrated or feel defeated or not sure what to do. My way of looking at problems like this is to put a hat on that says, okay, if our life depended upon it, if literally our life depended upon it, how would we do it? Would we cheat? Who could we pay off? What would be required for us to get this done? Does somebody need to be killed? Okay. In other words, when what government clerk is getting in our way, and what are we going to have to do? All right. So the point here is
WikiLeaks is going to start investigating us.
So my point here is that if we put on a little different hat in our imagination and we say, okay, if I had to do this, if I had to, what would I do about this? What could possibly be done? So, for example, instead of moping about the fact that I'm 30 pounds overweight and can't get a relationship, and none of the guys that I would be interested in would ever want to date me right now, but they should because I'm actually pretty and perfectly acceptable underneath, okay? So I'm not tugging on women. We could go the other side on men, but that's just the example that's floating around my head in the last 15 minutes. Now, the point is that I look at this problem, and this is an example of what I call a bullshit problem. So I divide the world up into two things, bullshit problems and real problems. Bullshit problems are problems as real as they are and as problematic and as upsetting as they are. they could absolutely be accomplished with enough effort. A real problem is a problem that you may not be able to solve. So you've got terminal cancer, your beloved mother has terminal cancer. You can't solve the problem. Okay, you are going to experience a major loss, and there's nothing that can be done about it. That's a real problem, and you know what? Life is hard and difficult, and you could just mitigate some of the real problems as best you can. But then there are other problems. Most of the problems that cause most of the human suffering in the world that people are upset about are what I call bullshit problems. And bullshit problems are problems that are solvable. They are just going to cause a considerable amount of inconvenience. Okay? And so the beautiful thing is to put on your imaginary hat and assume that, okay, if it was Hitler on the other side of this, that he was going to take over the world and we have to beat him, the question is, can we? And once you realize that if we had to do this to save our lives, we could absolutely do this, then it gives the problem a new perspective. Okay? And the perspective is, you know, we don't need to whine about it. We don't need to complain about it. We don't need to feel defeat about it. We don't even need to be depressed about it. We recognize that the problem is in our control. Nobody can stop us from solving the problem. And the only thing that's involved here is how much energy are we willing to expend to solve it. That is the truth about procrastination. Okay? Getting off your rear end, getting organized, using the concept of a taxonomy about things you're going to have to do versus things that, you know, and using the concept, if I'm going to have to do it and it's going to happen repeatedly, how can I act as an efficiency expert to make this thing run like a well-oiled machine so that it takes up the least possible mental effort in my life and takes up the least amount of time and no time where it's crowding out other things, you know, at the end of a deadline that could be more lucrative or important for me to use that time on. So essentially, you know, can we deal with this problem? Absolutely. Yes, we can. We can utilize our time and energy in an optimal fashion by using discipline behind this, and it's useful to sort of look at the problem globally in this way, to try to get motivated behind this so that we can see the costs and benefits more clearly. So can we snap our fingers and get rid of this sort of procrastination tendency? No. But we can attack it rationally, and hopefully with a deeper insight into its nature, people can see that it's a kissing kin to addiction, and it has its expenses just as addiction has its expenses.
Fantastic. And so this is if you're procrastinating due to laziness, is
Yes.
just to assume the worst case scenario and work backwards as to how you would get out of it.
Yes. Yes.
And so,
right.
and then at the beginning of the show, you mentioned though that there's a third option, which is that you set your sights a little bit too high.
Yeah, there's a couple more options that we could talk about other time. One of them is going to be what we're going to call the ego trap, which is a very very sticky and again a Stone Age algorithm that is often misapplied in the modern environment and is very costly for people. This is where people do not reach high for the goals that would be possible for them to attain because they are afraid of the status loss or embarrassment that's going to come if they fall short. So that's it. We can talk about that another time. And also the final reason for procrastination is just situation overwhelm, where the person's life has become sufficiently complex and it's difficult for them to actually run the analytics on what they should be attacking first because they've got too many urgencies and they're essentially frozen over. So those are two different problems, and we could talk about those another day.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Lisle. We really appreciate it.